Have you been looking around lately and felt as if people are losing their mind? There's actually a very good reason for this, and this reason has the potential to change the way that we approach mental illness. When most people think of unsafety, the kind of images that are conjured in their mind are situations where a person is in danger in a physical way, such as swimming with sharks, or being in a relationship with someone who's physically abusive, or driving in a blizzard, or being around someone who's infected with a virus, for example. But the actual picture of safety is much, much broader. To be safe is to be protected or free from harm, risk, injury, pain, and danger. But danger, risk, harm, pain, and injury can happen to us on all different levels. It can happen to us physically, it can happen to us mentally, it can happen to us emotionally. We can be unsafe as a result of what isn't done, just as easily as we can become unsafe as a result of what is done. After all, when our needs are not met, that is perceived as a danger to our well-being, and so, if our needs are not met, we cannot feel safe. Anytime our well-being and our best interests are opposed, we perceive ourselves to be unsafe. Now, this unsafety, it causes us to go into a state of distress, and distress is not a state that people can maintain. They can't live in distress. It corrodes our health. The stress itself becomes another antagonist to our well-being. So when we find ourselves in a situation where we feel like we can't change the situation so as to eradicate the stressor itself, we have no option but to adapt to it. What I mean by adapting to it is that we cope with it, right? To cope is to make a specific alteration mentally, emotionally, or physically so that you can manage or adapt to something that is causing you stress. And a coping mechanism is a specific procedure, strategy, process, or technique which manages or creates adaptation to stress. To make this simpler, if we find ourselves in an unsafe situation, but we can't change the situation to make the situation itself more safe in some way, then we can only manage, deal with, and adapt to that unsafe situation so as to make ourselves feel safer within that unsafe situation. The primary coping mechanism for a physical human is fragmentation. This is the splitting of one's own consciousness, so as to suppress, deny, and disown aspects of the self that we could consider vulnerable, and to the opposite, to put forward the aspects of the self that are capable of self-preservation, protecting you. A better way of saying this is that you separate between parts of you that are vulnerable and parts of you that are able to protect that vulnerability. We could call these protector parts protector personalities. And even though people tend to default to a particular protector with a particular strategy to stay safe in most situations, the reality is that people have several of them within themselves. If you want to learn about this in depth, you can watch my video titled Fragmentation, the Worldwide Disease. The thing is that these protector personalities have some processes, some strategies, and some behaviors for establishing safety that are pretty extreme. Now today, mental illness in our world is diagnosed on the basis of symptoms that present in a person. But if you look deep into these symptoms, they are really just indicators of unsafety and adaptive strategies that a person is using in order to try to self-preserve when faced with that unsafety. So that you can understand what I mean, here are a few examples. 1. Don grew up in a dysfunctional family system. His father was a raging alcoholic who was, quite frankly, more of a detriment to the family than he was a benefit to the family. His mother was a hopeless codependent. Don's codependent mother would literally let their father do anything to both Don and his brother, as long as it meant her not getting into a conflict and her not risking any of her needs that she was getting met covertly through the father. So she was a bystander and an enabler. Don's brother Charlie figured out that the only way to stay safe in this home was to just be everything that his parents wanted, especially Dad. He was going to be the kid that had no problems whatsoever and caused no problems whatsoever. See, Everything in this family was set up on the premise that really, secretly, it's every man out for himself. Now, Don could not get himself to be the problem-free child that his brother could. No matter what he did, he could never get on his father's good side. And his mother only ever sided with his father. So what Don decided very early on is that the only way he was going to be able to stay safe in this situation was to realize that it's every man out for himself and to be powerfully for his own best interests, to fight against everyone else in the family for the sake of himself. It's not that Don's realization about what it took to stay safe in the family was limited to the family, right? He made it mean that in the world, if he was ever going to stay safe, he needed to be out for himself. He needed to be concerned with his own best interests, and he needed to fight for his own needs against other people. Even though down deep, Don has very low self-esteem, Don behaves extremely arrogant. He exaggerates his achievements and his talents. He's able to suppress his feelings of powerlessness by deciding that he's meant for big things in this life. He focuses his mind obsessively on his own success and power. He seeks admiration wherever he goes. He insists on having the best of everything. He monopolizes every conversation. He uses other people to his advantage. He confuses unquestioning compliance with love. He tunes out the needs and feelings of others. Don has been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, but what people are calling a disorder is really just the strategy that Don has come up with to keep himself safe, given what he experienced as a child and what he made that mean about the world. 2. Jake was born into a very wealthy political family. He was born into a family that cared much more about their own personal success and the way that they appeared to the outside and their political agenda than they cared about the needs and well-being of any individual member of the family. When Jake was young, he needed guidance and tenderness and comfort. Instead, he was passed off into a transient stream of nannies and sent off to a harsh boarding school. As a child, when he acted unhappy or started to express his issues with what was happening, he was immediately invalidated. He spent his life being gaslit, being told that unlike other people, he had everything, being told that only losers can't make the best of things, being shamed and isolated for any negative emotion that he had, and later being sent off to centers in secret for rehab because no one in the public can find out someone in our family has these issues. Jake is in a great deal of despair. To be honest with you, he feels like shit about himself. He feels like something is completely wrong and bad about him because he can't just feel fine and fit in with the rest of the way that the family deals with the world. He's not that successful one, according to their standards. Jake is emotionally starving. But that part of Jake that's emotionally starving and that's in despair doesn't keep him safe. In fact, it just makes him more unsafe. It keeps lining him up with all these consequences that are so painful to him. So what's he going to do? He's going to suppress, deny, and disown that part of himself. Whenever something happens in his life that causes that despair to creep up, he suppresses it so fast he doesn't even recognize the trigger. Instead, he feels like all of a sudden these feelings and how he copes with it comes out of the blue. And in order to stay away from the perceived unsafety that his despair and emotional starvation aspect causes, his protector personality steps in. And what does it do? This part of him starts to behave manically. It won't let him go to sleep because slowing down would mean being present to how he's actually feeling. It causes his thoughts to race uncontrollably. It causes him to go on buying sprees and to take drugs. It causes him to go climb dangerous mountains with little to no preparation and with no rest periods. It tells him and other people stories about how amazingly he's doing in life and about the big things in the world he's going to create and accomplish. All of this, of course, is an avoidance strategy. And the thing about avoidance strategies is they don't last very long. Soon after 4 days or so, Jake can't keep this up. And because the energy of suppression is energy fed into that aspect of himself that he is suppressing, suddenly he experiences another part's takeover. Only this time, the part that takes over is that aspect of him that is emotionally starving, that is in absolute despair. When this happens, Jake has no energy at all. He is depressed and he finds no pleasure in the things he usually enjoys. He loses his appetite and he feels guilty and worthless. During these periods, he frequently starts to think about plans about how to kill himself. Jake has no idea what to do to exit this never-ending cycle. Jake is considered to be mentally ill. Jake, of course, has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. But the psychiatrist who diagnosed him with bipolar disorder is failing to recognize that all of what is presenting in Jake is simply this adaptive strategy that Jake has been using to try to deal with the part of him that was and is unsafe, and the part of him that is trying to keep him safe in that unsafe situation. 3. Ruth was molested by her stepbrother. At the time that it was happening, Ruth knew that it was wrong. She knew that it was terrifying and that it didn't feel good. However, Ruth's stepbrother kept telling her when he was in the middle of molesting her that he was doing it because she was so beautiful. As a result, Ruth felt totally out of control of herself. Not only out of control of herself because her stepbrother proved he could do whatever he wanted with her body, no matter what she wanted or didn't want, but also because she felt out of control of the part of her that actually wanted the positive attention that she got from him when he said, "I'm doing this because you're so beautiful." Being out of control to this degree made Ruth feel unsafe. So how did she try to get safe again? She took control over her body. Ruth started severely restricting her food intake, even to the point of starvation. She would misuse laxatives, diuretics, and diet aids. She became addicted to enemas, and she would exercise so excessively that she lost her periods. Ruth has been diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. But what Ruth is experiencing and what we are calling anorexia is just an adaptive strategy to the specific state of unsafety that Ruth herself was experiencing in her childhood. There are so many strategies, processes, procedures, behaviors, and techniques that people use to try to be safe in situations where they perceive themselves to be unsafe. I could be here all day listing them. But to give you just a tiny little taste of some examples. When someone perceives there to be a threat to their well-being, a person might isolate, become defensive, go into denial, run away and avoid, become combative, become controlling, catastrophize, worry, micromanage, fawn, bully, romanticize the past, slip into an overlay, become pessimistic, become optimistic, dissociate, become manic, take drugs or medications, spend compulsively, self-harm, sleep, be promiscuous, project, deflect, binge, become passive-aggressive, play zero-sum games, become self-righteous, lie, become overly friendly, or be guarded, etc. Any of these procedures or processes or behaviors or whatever it is that a person is using to try to establish safety within their life, we may look at and call maladaptive. We may think, there's no way in hell that ensures your best interests, because obviously it demolishes your best interests. But we only say this because we're not looking close enough. Any of these strategies that a person is using is a strategy that a person perceives to be keeping them more safe than the alternative. What this means is that when a person is using a maladaptive strategy, and by that what I mean is they're using some strategy to keep themselves safe that at face value obviously makes them more unsafe, they're actually in a lose-lose. They find themselves in a situation where they're between pain and they're simply choosing the least painful option. For example, a person might use the strategy of cutting to self-preserve. Now at face value you might be like, wait a minute, how is it self-preservation or keeping you safe if you're cutting up your own body? Like this. People who do this are choosing the pain of the physical harm of the knife and the interpersonal consequences that come with having cut themselves over the pain of the severity of their distress being unseen, or over the distress of being held captive by rigid and inflexible rule structures about emotional expression, and therefore being unable to express anger or despair. To understand more about this, you can watch my video titled, "There is no such thing as self-sabotage." Long story short, I'm going to literally spell this one out for you, okay? When a person perceives that their own well-being and best interests are threatened, even at a subconscious level, they perceive themselves to be unsafe. And this perception of unsafety causes people to employ protective strategies, procedures, processes, techniques, and behaviors. These strategies often make people behave in ways that seem not sane. They cause people to behave in ways that are unsafe to other people as well, and this becomes a vicious cycle. This whole dynamic that I'm talking about occurs naturally within people, but I can tell you that this occurrence is greatly amplified when periods of unsafety within the collective consciousness of mankind are at an all-time high. Think famine, think war. think pandemics. This is what is happening in the world around you today. I'm going to spell it out for you. In the world today, people are feeling more unsafe than ever. And that unsafety could be as a result of anything. Whether it's the fear of a virus, or whether it's the fear of measures being taken as a result of people who are afraid of that virus, whether it's fear about finances, I mean, you name it. So right now we're in this peak relative to fear. As a result, people's protector personalities are stepping in with all of these procedures and processes and techniques and behaviors to try to keep themselves safe. But by employing those strategies, they themselves are becoming unsafe to others. Have you noticed? And as a result, everyone they come into contact with is upping their protector personalities as well, which makes the other people more unsafe, which makes their protector personalities even more inflamed, which makes other people even more unsafe. And now we're in a vicious cycle. Essentially, what you are looking at in the world today is an inflamed world. Now remember that I told you, when these protector personalities employ these processes and strategies and behaviors, they aren't going to seem sane. This is a world that is genuinely unsafe and genuinely insane because of the very strategies people are all using to try to stay safe and preserve or bring about their own well-being. One thing though, I don't want you to fall into this trap of believing people in the world right now when they say that they're just trying to keep other people safe. When people are in this self-preservation mode, they're very self-oriented. And what that means is that even if somebody is trying to protect someone else, it's because doing so would somehow protect them in some way. To give you an example of this dynamic as it applies to the world that you live in today, let's start with Jenna. Jenna perceives that a virus is going to kill her and those she loves. Jenna might have persistent thoughts and images of herself in a hospital or of helplessly watching someone she loves struggle to breathe. She might try to mitigate that unsafety by watching the news day and night because information makes her feel safer. She might do it by isolating in her home, by obsessively washing her hands, and by becoming combative online with people who aren't taking safety measures seriously. Jenna starts to perceive that the people who are not taking measures are a threat to her and to those she loves. The way Jenna behaves now starts to make other people feel unsafe. And one of those people is Crystal. Crystal has been friends with Jenna for 10 years. But lately, Jenna's obsessive-compulsive and militant behavior is making Crystal feel really unsafe. As a yoga instructor and doula, Crystal has always seen the deep-rooted problems within the medical and pharmaceutical establishment. She's a natural health freak, after all. She feels like Jenna, and the people like her, that are both establishing and supporting the mask-wearing and lockdowns and vaccination measures are against her best interests, and the best interests of the world. She sees herself losing the choice about what happens with her own body. She sees the consequences of isolation. She imagines that she and the world is headed towards a totalitarian regime. She might try to mitigate this unsafety by texting Jenna passive-aggressive memes, by ignoring the news altogether, by reading about her constitutional rights, by submitting scathing letters to her local government, and by investing in a gun, something she thought she would never own. The strategies that Crystal is using to try to mitigate her unsafety makes Jenna feel more unsafe. And the more unsafe Jenna feels, the more extreme her protective strategies become. And this makes Crystal feel even more unsafe. And the more unsafe Crystal feels, the more extreme her protective strategies become. Does this sound familiar? Because this is what is happening in the world, and it is continuing to escalate to the point that we have a world that is severely inflamed. By understanding what is really going on within the world, it may change the way that you approach the way that you are dealing with yourself and the way that you are dealing with other people in the world today. And by understanding that what we are calling mental illness is really an adaptive strategy to try to mitigate unsafety, we have the capacity to change our approach entirely to mental illness. Have a good week. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and consider sharing this video with your friends. You can also click on the bell icon to be notified of the next time that I post a video. I want to thank you personally for the bravery that you have to step into awareness. I'll see you in the next video.